All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. This is Accuracy in America. I'm joined today once again by my friend and guest, Cheryl Chumley, the online opinion editor for the Washington Times. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hey, it's great to be with you again, Don.
Yeah, it's been, like we said just before we started, it's been we've been busy doing other things.
I know, but reunited again. So.
Yes, life gets in the way of a lot of other things. Well, there's been plenty of news, and so it's always interesting to kind of pick your brain here and get your opinions about some of the things that have been going on. One of them was obviously yesterday, President Biden giving a speech about voting rights and I guess democracy and all of these things. And what's your take on what President Biden did or tried to do or is doing? Where are we going with the press?
Well, I think he was spinning his tail off when he issued these fiery remarks about how this is the most serious issue since Civil War days, and then he repeated that, and then he doubled down and said this is not hyperbole to say this, which is, of course, a deception. That's exactly what it is. It's hyperbole, because when you're talking about what states are doing, Republican-controlled states are doing with election laws, all they're doing is going through and tightening up where the coronavirus and the exemptions and exceptions that were made over the last year of voting were actually, shown on the public square to be rife with fraud. So states now, rightfully so, are going back and reevaluating their laws and just coming to terms with how they might tighten up the process. And I think that's something that should unite Democrats and Republicans. The reason it's not is because elections that are rife with fraud tend to favor Democrats, and they like the chaos.
Yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, I listen to the president, I listen to these Democrats, and it just, they want to bring up about, this is like the biggest threat to our democracy, and the president also likes to use the words, Jim Crow as well. And I just don't know, on the Jim Crow thing, I just don't know how that really resonates beyond maybe a very small base at this point in time, because it just seems, the president is doing a lot of bidding for the far left, and they like that stuff. But does a Jim Crow message, is that something you can sell to the broader public?
Honestly, I don't think so, but I think what it does do well is that it puts it in the media as an ongoing cycle of news. So you can throw out there Joe Biden's quote about Jim Crow, and that's easy to throw on social media. And so it generates from the far left base of the Democrat Party, which seems to me to be growing exponentially in recent times. It gives them cause to weigh in on this already radical type of characterization. And then the media, the mainstream media, the CNN pundits, the NBC hosts and pundits can take that narrative and they can make a whole cycle out of it, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, and they can keep generating this idea in America that any type of legislative look at election laws is tantamount to Jim Crow era. And they can further that narrative. And whether it's true or not, we get to a certain point in this country that perception sells. And so it's easy for people to be fooled into believing that a large majority, a large portion of America thinks this way, when that's all you see in much of the mainstream media.
Yeah, Jim Crow, for me, these are just these kind of code words or buzzwords or whatever you want to call them for the Democrats. They love to bring this up because it basically, to me, it says, you say Jim Crow equals racism. So if you drop that, and the Democrats love to use racism, this way they don't have to say racist. They don't have to use the R word. They can use something else that just denotes that. And that gets people all up in a lather. They don't have to even understand what Jim Crow, what the era was, what the laws were at the time, and how different things are today. But you put that into the conversation, and just like you said, the media gloms onto that. They can use that in a news cycle, and it just kind of feeds that whole narrative as we go forward on all of this. And also, this thing too about democracy. and I find that, all this talk about the Democrats, whether or not it's Joe Biden or whether or not it's the Democrats in Texas or whoever, the Democrats in Congress talking about, where, this is the greatest assault on our democracy. Jen Psaki will say these things. It's like, who's assaulting democracy? I mean, I think they're the ones that are assaulting democracy with all of this stuff.
Yeah, but that's what Democrats always do, isn't it? They point to others and accuse them of the very same thing that they're guilty of. So the Democrat Party is constantly guilty of spinning and deceiving with rhetoric. And what they do to distract from their own deceptions is to point to Republicans and point to conservative America for spinning and deceiving. And really, it's enough if you're not paying attention to the news cycles. It's just mind-boggling how frequently the Democrat Party uses rhetoric to lie and deceive, while all the while accusing Republicans and conservatives of lying and deceiving. So really, it takes a real grounded person to sift through the lies of the Democrat Party and conclude that what they accuse is in itself what they're guilty of.
Yeah, I do have to admit, I find it hard as a conservative to, every time I hear them do this, is that I'm like, can't you people see through this? That, their message, but I realize is that I'm not like everybody else. So, you and I are different than a lot of other people. We understand a lot of these things, and a lot of Americans don't. They have been so, indoctrinated, grounded by the media and certain things. And so they will follow them, just word by word. And if the Walter Cronkites, the current era of those guys say this, it must be true, So Rachel Maddow and her gang, they can spin anything they want, and the liberals just lap that up. So it's always kind of a difficult thing to go through. Now you were talking about what the tightening up of these laws, kind of correcting the problems, the loopholes, et cetera, that we spotted really in the state laws, election laws, really because of the pandemic. The pandemic, relaxed everything for the most part, and so allowed was pretty open-ended in terms of what you could do during 2020 and voting. And this is also another thing that just drives me kind of crazy. Is just that how Americans, are being fooled about this whole narrative. The Democrats are calling this the racist, the Jim Crow, all this undemocratic kind of thing like this, where all it is trying to fix the flaws, the loopholes in the laws that the pandemic allowed to happen. I look at other things in our lives that were upended in 2020. The DMV in Maryland, the Motor Vehicle Administration, they relaxed virtually everything. You had to go to if you needed a driver's license renewal, you had to make an appointment, and it was a real pain in the neck. But if you had a vehicle inspection, we have these every other year, these every 2-year emissions inspections. All of those were suspended until they finally decided, until the pandemic was basically in their mind over. Driver's license renewals were given a lot of latitude on that, So car registrations, a lot of latitude. Police weren't necessarily going to pull you over if your sticker showed that it was expired, because it could, if it expired during the pandemic, probably us as at the MVA, it was really not operating much during that period of time. And that can be applied to a lot of things in our lives. Once again, in Maryland, Easy Pass, we have a lot of Easy Pass in Maryland. I know you've got the tolls in Virginia too. Mm-hmm. But I saw a conversation on the local next door where people were like, they were a little bit alarmed because they started getting their Easy Pass bills for the first time in like a year, and they didn't say they were, they admitted they were legitimate, they were valid bills, but they were just shocked to see $100 or $200 or something like that. These are all the things that had built up because the Department of Transportation or whatever, Maryland Transportation Authority, had basically suspended collecting of all of these tolls. I think I don't really use the toll system that much, but I think that explains why my credit card has been charged a little bit more, because as they catch up, they're like, okay, time to replenish. We caught up, we used that up, time to replenish, and stuff like that. And so they were trying to catch up a little bit too. So, there's nothing wrong with fixing the things that you found wrong. In some ways, the pandemic, as much as we've discovered some of these problems, it may have done us a favor in the sense is that we found flaws in the system that we can fix, and that we'll be prepared for the next time around. But for them to call this suppression and all these kind of things is completely wrong.
Yeah, it's a complete lie, really. I mean, election laws are there for a reason, to prevent fraud. And the reason Democrats want to keep elections loose, and they want to expand the ability of Americans to vote by mail, to vote weeks ahead of the election, to stretch election day into election week, election month, endless elections, is because it creates this sort of chaotic result during the count. And if the count isn't going Democrats' way, when there's chaos, they can always take it to court. So then election day becomes, before the election, it becomes days and weeks of voting. And after the election, if the ballot counts aren't going Democrats' ways, it becomes days and weeks and even months of court challenges. And that is why basically that Democrats do not want to tighten up election laws. And to go to your point about what you were saying about the DMV and that there are certain goods that have come from the coronavirus, here in Virginia, we have the same type of DMV program, and we had the same issues with the DMV as you described in Maryland. And I actually think that it's a good thing that came from the coronavirus, where people going to the DMV were actually given appointments, because anybody and everybody who has to deal with the DMV, it's an old tired joke that you have to take the day off from work to go and get your license renewed. And you could get there, at 6 a.m, line up 2 hours before it opens, and you're going to be there all day. But if you have to make an appointment, at least that narrows the window a bit. And they also moved so many of the renewals and types of issues that you would have to go to the DMV for, they moved them online. So to me, that is an improvement of a government service that I actually think should stay in place for forever. And another thing that coronavirus alerted us to were some of the issues in the schools that parents had been turning blind eyes to for so many years. I know that your organization does a good job about alerting Americans to issues in the public school system that need addressing. But for so many parents, for so many years, they were happy just to drop their kids off at school or let the bus pick them up. And they paid little attention to what was actually being taught. And as a matter of fact, they just fell on the side of supporting their teachers because they loved the teachers and they thought teachers can do no wrong. They forgot that teachers are part of a government school system. So here we have the critical race theory backlash and all the outings that have happened over the last year because of the clampdowns on sending kids to schools. And again, that is a good thing to come from the coronavirus.
Yeah, since you went there, I did have to say, I mean, there was that big controversy in Loudoun County, and then there's this other thing that's going on too with the PTA and at the Thomas Jefferson Science and Technology School. I mean, I think there was, they managed to get most of the other PTA board members out, and some new people came in that wanted to fix things because of the things that were going on there. And then there's been some controversy over there. So you've got some interesting things happening in Virginia where it looks like the parents are waking up. It seems like, I'm in Montgomery County. It's they're parents that are upset, but they don't seem to quite have the same ability to do what they've been able to do out in Virginia. And I'm kind of hoping that maybe some of this will transfer to Maryland, and we'll get some stronger organizations parent-wise to fight this, because you're right. Parents, it's almost a knee-jerk reaction. They just think the teachers are, they're almost like gods. I mean, they can't do any wrong. They're going to teach our kids, we're going to get the kid, they've got a great education, and they have totally ignored the curriculum over the years. And they have watched that, they have just let that leftist tilt creep in and take over. So you have this critical race theory, you've got the 1619 project that they're trying to bring in, and all of this stuff. And finally, we're getting a little bit of the Great Awakening with this, and maybe we can turn some of this around.
Yep, that's it. The Great Awakening. That's a good way to put it. And I hope it spreads far and wide because really in America, we are at a crossroads right now between the insane left taking over and the sane Americans who just want tradition and limited government and things like that for their children to enjoy.
That's right. Before I move off from one last thing about the election and the voting thing, is I just wanted to get your quick take about what they did in Texas with all those Democrats in the House which fled on a private plane to Washington D.C. And they're hailed as heroes for subverting the House in that special session from voting on the Texas voting laws. Now that the Texas Senate has voted to pass that, and Governor Abbott has said, "Hey, look, I'll just keep calling special sessions until we get this done." So I mean, I think this is inevitable. But what's up with what's up with these Democrats?
Yeah, speaking of insane, right? Speaking of insanity, we're just jumping from, here's a good example of it, what the Democrats do. And this isn't the first time Democrats have done this. You remember years ago when they protested the crackdowns in Wisconsin with Governor Scott Walker about the unions, the teachers' unions. What did Democrats do then? They cried and they fled across the border so they could avoid the vote. They're just getting better at it. They just seem to, jump to that flee gun faster than they used to. And I found it a little bit humorous that the pictures of them riding on the airplane filled with smiles and all that, not one of them had a mask on. Those are the same people that cried about going back to school, right? Because students don't have to wear masks or they haven't been vaccinated and so forth. But yeah, this is insane. This is where Democrats are losing it, because instead of dealing with policy and standing up and making a case and trying to persuade and convince others into their way of thinking, they just put their heads down like 2-year-old toddlers and run fleeing from the room. And the sad part about this is that these are tax-paid positions, right? When you elect somebody, you expect them to be on the job. So I think that the Republican leadership in Texas is taking the right stance here and doing the right response by issuing arrest warrants for them and making it clear that this is not proper politicking.
Yeah, and I didn't look into it. Maybe you know a little bit more about this. It's like, who paid for that? Whose private jet was that? Who paid for that? And who's paying for their time in D.C., to put them up, and where are they staying? So somebody's got to be footing that bill. But I love this thing about the mask. And I had not thought of it until you mentioned it. It's like, if you fly on, if you have to go through the TSA checkpoint and all this stuff, federal regulations say you have to wear a mask on a plane. So I guess on the private, it doesn't apply to the private plane. But yeah, all these whiny liberal politicians, yeah, they're all smiling like, hey, we're happy, we're going to have a party. It's crazy.
Yeah. These are the same people that insist you and me have to wear masks for the rest of our lives or stay in our house and stay out of work. So it just strikes me as another example of liberal hypocrisy.
All right. So that'll move us on to briefly discuss something that came up while over the last few weeks, which was this idea that the Biden administration wants to send government workers of some sort out kind of door to door in these areas that have low vaccination rates and encourage them or get them vaccinated and everything like this. A terrible idea. I mean, I understand, I guess, the thought that we have parts of the country that have got extremely low vaccination rates, but going door to door, I mean, exactly what is going to happen? It doesn't seem that they really thought out exactly how they plan to do this, who's going to be behind it, and what's really going to happen, and the people's reaction to this.
Well, it is a terrible idea, but actually it is pretty well thought out. This was a strategy that came up over a year ago in the Democrat Party. There's a Democrat named Congressman Bobby Rush who introduced a piece of legislation. And interestingly enough, it was numbered HR 6666. Seriously, look it up. It was the Contact Tracing Everybody Act. I forget the exact word. And within that bill, within it was $100 billion of funding, of taxpayer funding. That's billion with a B, and that funding was only for 10 years. So we're not talking about we're 10 years, $100 billion, that's a lot of money. And so what it did, though, was basically send people, one aspect of the bill was to send government bureaucrats door to door, knocking on people's doors and making sure that they were vaccinated, that they had the contact tracing technology uploaded on their phones, and that basically that they were complying with the government's best practices and best response practices for the coronavirus. And so that bill got stalled. I reported on it. It ended up on the Drudge Report in the very top of the page, and it generated a lot of backlash, a lot of panic, and then a lot of apologizing from the left, who basically said that criticism of this bill was completely unwarranted, that it did not advocate for government officials going door to door, even though that's exactly what the bill said. So now fast forward, and we have Joe Biden using this same language, sending government officials door to door to try and persuade American citizens into getting the vaccine. Look, we all know in America about the vaccine. We don't need extra government pressure coming into our own homes, coming to our very front doors and telling us that we need to get the vaccine. We are American citizens able to decide for ourselves and endowed by our creator, not government, with the rights to choose, the rights to decide for ourselves whether we want to take a vaccine or not. And when the government talks about going door to door, it shouldn't be taken lightly. I know that there has been some talk in the days since Joe Biden made that remark that those people who find it a little over the top are basically panicking. They're basically generating some right-wing talking points and so forth. But he did say, go door to door. And that tells me that he wants to send government bureaucrats to my front door to try and persuade me to get the vaccine. It's unnecessary, it's over the top, and it's really a little bit chilling when you look at it in terms of the larger picture that's been going on with the coronavirus.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's that's that old adage to that saying was, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, type of thing. It's like, there are a lot of people, I mean, that's the last thing they want is anybody from the government showing up on their doorstep, telling them, encouraging them to do anything like that. And you're right. I mean, it is our individual, freedom and right to choose whether or not to get vaccinated. Now, I do not judge people on the scale of whether or not they're vaccinated or not. That's their choice. If they don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. We've been having people over our house for the last month or whatever, and just in small groups. I assume that they're probably fairly protected, but I don't, there's not a requirement on no one wears a mask in the house when they come over. I don't really worry about it. That's their choice as to their status. But there've been no spikes or surges or anything like that. There's no super spreader been pointed at my house yet, so I think I'm okay. So we're going to continue doing it. But yeah, I don't know. This whole thing. That's a fascinating thing about this whole bill. I'm going to have to look this up because I had no idea until you mentioned this. So this has definitely been part of the longer term plan. Like Joe Biden is trying to pick up the ball where it just failed to get through in Congress. But I don't see how even with Joe Biden up there that this is going to really be able to go anywhere. I mean, I guess he could say executive order or something like that and try to push that out. But I think there's just going to be a lot of revolt from people about the idea about this.
Well, I do think that there will be some door-to-door knocking because what's going to happen is there's going to be money that trickles to the state, right, and from the state to the localities, and then the localities are going to take it on themselves to actually do the work of going door to door to justify the taking of money. Another interesting thing that I've seen is that I'm also a private investigator, and I keep not frequently, but I keep abreast of some of the job postings and so forth for investigators. And I've noticed over the last year that there have been a slew of postings on private investigator job pages for contact tracers, which means they want to hire private investigators to go door to door to do the coronavirus contact tracing, which is another thing that was part of that HR 6666. So it may not blare forth in your local community about people going door to door to talk about coronavirus issues, contact tracing, and vaccinations, but it will be done, and it is being done. And I think as people will grow more accustomed to it, that it won't make the news like it is now.
All right. All right. Final topic to discuss for a few minutes here is the unrest in Cuba. Fascinating to see this happen in Cuba. The reaction of the Cuban government is not surprising at all in retrospect. But, you know, as I read about it, or at least that's what I thought I saw about this, is that a lot of this really started because there were these rappers in Cuba that were kind of underground. They did some TikTok video or some other thing that got a heck of a lot of views. And that really started to help spur a lot of people in Cuba to take to the streets and say, hang on, you know, we're lacking in food and medicine and a whole bunch of other things, our freedoms, and we want change. And the Cuban government, I mean, they're pointing to the U.S. for creating this unrest. Then they've cut off the internet service, I understand. Not that the internet service was very good in Cuba. I always understand it was pretty bad, but they've cut off even the bad service, you know, kind of a la what China would do for things that, you know, if you protest in China, you know, they try to ban you, get you cut off the internet. But, you know, what's your take on what's going on in Cuba, and what's the administration going to do?
Right. It's funny that Cuba's blaming America, and the Joe Biden White House, the State Department in particular, is blaming the coronavirus. I mean, it's crazy that Democrats have aligned themselves with Cuban communists to basically stay quiet and cover up what's really going on here, which is a rebellion against communist rule. You know, the country's been in crackdown, lockdown state. Liberties have been handed out by the government for decades now, and the people are getting sick and tired of it. And I suppose you could make a case that the coronavirus has something to do with it, that spikes in coronavirus case counts down there in Cuba, which you can debate as truthful or not. But the fact is, the reporting of spikes in case counts have led to some people looking for medical attention, looking for ways to protect themselves. And the PPE gear isn't available. The vaccine isn't freely available as some people would like. There have been issues with health supplies and medical supplies there. So that may have had actually some sort of spark in the rebellion. But really, this is about freedom. This is about people finding, from within, finally, the courage to go out there in the streets and say to the media, on public media, that they're not afraid anymore of the government, which is a little bit astonishing when you consider what the government is doing in response. But it's people sick of being told what to do by the government, sick of being locked down, sick of being ruled by dictators, and they're finally fighting back. They want their liberties.
And it doesn't seem the Biden administration wants any of these Cubans to come here.
Well, no, he doesn't need any more Republican voters, right? I mean, Florida went Republican in large part because, you have all these Cuban refugees that come here, and you have like little Havana down in Miami that just, they know firsthand what it's like to live under communism. And they have, someone like Senator Marco Rubio talking on Capitol Hill what it's like to live under communist and socialist rulers. And they don't want Democrats leading them in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, where does this leave Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, Bernie Sanders for a long time has been a socialist slash communist apologist, right? And where it leaves him is basically where he is now. The Democrat Party is quiet on Cuba for one reason and one reason only, that they actually see the ideology of communism as something that one day they would like to see in America. They won't admit that. Democrats don't like to admit that, and they will deny it. But if you look at how close Democrat policies are with socialist policies and communist policies, they're really one and the same.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, I don't really hold off any hope that Cuba, the Cubans are going to get much freedom. I mean, we've seen what China did in Hong Kong. They've really quashed all those protests and clamped down and thrown all these people into prison, and it's really terrible to see what China's done. And I mean, these countries tend to kind of march in lockstep with each other, though Cuba's been probably worse off economically. They have totally mismanaged their country. But yeah, I mean, look, Miami, you mentioned Miami. I mean, they had a huge protest down there. I think it blocked a freeway or whatever. The people down there are saying, look, we want, do something for our people, our relatives, and stuff like that, for which I fully expect that, the Biden administration is just, that's not on their radar. They're not going to, they're going to totally ignore that, for sure.
Maybe they'll send Kamala Harris down there, and
put her in charge of the Cuban problem. She's doing everything else so well.
Yeah.
She's got such a sterling track record on everything else the Biden administration has given her. Amazing. All right, thank you, Cheryl, for joining me today. This was good. I learned a lot here today. Always appreciate your time and your insight and your wisdom. So everyone, thanks again for joining us. Remember, please always stay safe, stay well. We live in the greatest country in the world. God bless America, and we will see you again. I guess we'll be off next week, but we'll join you again in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.